Hello, everybody, and welcome to this roundtable on tax and legal issues in international fundraising. My name is Anna Rottenecker, and I'm the Executive Director of the Hong Kong Foundation for Charities. I will tell you more about this in a minute. I just wanted to introduce you before to Nancy Bixson, who is the Managing Director of Chapel in York. Maybe you want to wave, Nancy, so that everybody knows. Excellent. And Ralph Leonard, who is the Executive Director of the Chapel in York Singapore Foundation. Excellent.
And Asia Pacific.
Oh, true. It's a new role and it completely slipped my hand. I'm very sorry about this.
No problem.
Welcome to the Asia Pacific, Ralph.
A nice place to play.
We hope we see you down this end of it at some stage.
Well, I've had my jobs. I'm just waiting for things to open up.
Aren't we all?
And we are all waiting for borders to open up. Maybe I'll just give you a quick words of who we are. Chapel in York is the home of the international fundraising, as we like to say it. So we are the experts in international fundraising and tax-effective international giving. Nancy, who is here with us today, is actually our founding manager. So she is the one who knows everything since the last 35 years, I think, about what we do and what we have done. For the housekeeping, I suggest if you have any questions, you put them into the chat and then I will read them out either after the session, or if there are questions that are pertinent to something that have been said at the very moment, I will read them out loud so that either Nancy, Ralph, me, or whoever else would like to answer can answer. And I hope we can get a small discussion running on this very fascinating issue in the international fundraising world. Yes, maybe Ralph, do you want to start to give a short overview of fundraising and
in Singapore?
Behind in Singapore? I would follow on Hong Kong, and then we give it over to Nancy, who will cover many other countries for us.
The rest of the world.
The rest of the world. Okay, very good. Thank you.
Well,
Ralph,
I will introduce one of the best places to fundraise in the world, Singapore. While it might be small, it punches way above its weight. And if you have tax liabilities in Singapore, or you're a citizen or a permanent resident, if you make a donation, you can take 2.5 times off your taxable income. And if you're if you're donating to an education institution, it's a 1-for-1 matching grant. And if it's an endowment, it's a 1.5 to 1 matching grant. And I think it's still going on for cultural organizations, which are performing arts and others like that. You can get a 3-to-1 matching grant. So for Singapore, they're trying to create a culture of philanthropy, and they've been doing that for several years. They even took over an old secondary school to enable charities to be having rent-free accommodation. So while they have very strict laws in terms of sending money overseas, if you're in Singapore, it's a great place to fundraise. Over to you, Anna.
That is a very impressive motivation, actually, to fundraise in Singapore, I must say. Unfortunately, we don't have that in Hong Kong. It's an important place to fundraise in Asia just because of the type of population we have here, but fundraising, especially for overseas institutions, is a little bit more restricted, which means that if you want to fundraise in Hong Kong, you can fundraise for all issues around poverty alleviation, education, or religion. But if you're an organization who would like to fundraise for things like environmental protection, climate change, what else could we have? Animal protection, for instance, then unfortunately there is no possibility to tax efficiently fundraise abroad from Hong Kong. So there's this very tiny limits on the causes you can fundraise for. Having said that, under alleviation of poverty, there are many causes that can be fundraised for under this specific topic. Tax effectively, as in many other jurisdictions, I think, around the world, if you want to fundraise tax effectively in Hong Kong, the donation needs to go to a local organization. which in this case could be the Hong Kong Foundation for Charities, which is part of the Chaplain York family of foundations. You can also set up your own foundation here in Hong Kong, which comes with quite an administrative workload. Maybe the unique element of if you do this in Hong Kong is that here you need to, you cannot only set up your foundation via a company and then get charitable status. You also need to include an intermediary, I might place it like this, who's called company secretary, who is there. It's a legal requirement for you, and it does help a lot when it comes up to communication with the government. This is maybe the one unique aspect if you are thinking about setting up your own entity in Hong Kong. I'm happy to go into more details if there is an interest or if there are some questions around this. And otherwise, I would hand over to Nancy, who is our brain actually for this.
Thank you very much. I'm not so sure if I'm a brain, but what I am is, for my sins, a lawyer. And so for the last 25 years have been doing international fundraising and tax and legal stuff. So so I've learned a fair amount of stuff and have been working with almost any possible issues that people have, although there's usually something that comes up that we don't know about. What I wanted to just do was just do a quick survey a bit around the world, because I know we're talking, this is Asia Pacific, but also obviously there's usually some interest in other things. It's very interesting. There are, most of the world has some sort of tax benefit for giving to a charity, more or less, whatever the situations. The fascinating, with the exception of Sweden, which has just got rid of its in the last several years, and to the huge consternation of the nonprofit community. The big difference is that some countries are very happy for money to go abroad, others, and still award a tax deduction to the donors. Others are much less so. So, for example, leading the way in the much less so is Singapore, where obviously things need to benefit the Singaporean community. But most of Asia is sort of the same in terms of, and there's no tax deduction if money leaves the country or goes for other things, including to everybody, the rest of the world's huge consternation, Australia, of course, which only allows a tax deduction if money is for very, very, very narrow poverty issues abroad. And I know New Zealand has tried for years to try to get there to be a tax deduction if money went to the universities, which a lot of Australians support. So most of Asia, Asia Pacific, there's no tax deductions for giving abroad. Although again, you got to get to a local charity even there. Then as we're kind of heading west, the picture starts to change. So most of Europe, you can give a tax deduction, you can give a donation, and then there's a tax deduction for giving, for using the money abroad. Although again, you've got to give to a local charity, which then in whatever way possible gives the money abroad. And then as we keep going, obviously, the UK doesn't have a tax deduction at all. It's got something wonderful, which isn't celebrated enough, called gift aid, where for every pound that's given, the government, bless them, even though we don't have any money left after COVID, will still give 25 pence to the charity. So it's a benefit really for the charity. There's a small benefit to the donor if they're what we call a higher rate taxpayer. But I highly encourage anybody who's interested in fundraising to look at the UK if that's a useful market. Obviously, what's more important is the relationship and the possibility of getting the money. But it's a pretty good way of getting extra money for very little extra effort in the UK. When we cross the Atlantic into the States, obviously there are tax benefits in Latin America. Everybody is, or most people are interested in America. I would also encourage you, there is a tax deduction in America, and of course they are rather obsessed with their tax deductions there. This is actually, you've got about, what is this, beginning of October, so you've got about 3 months to get any donations out of the States. There are extra benefits this year as a result of COVID. So there's no limitations for how much people can give. So it's a really important year, I think, to make sure that you're out there, because we don't know how long the limitations will, whether they'll come back or whether there's some other benefits out there that are happening this year in terms of no bottom line limitations as well. So I would highly encourage everybody to make certain that they they're making certain that you are talking to particularly your major gifts. This is a really important time to be able to do that. And finally, our newest foundation and newest country is Canada. And Canada has decided to do something completely different. So rather than just they have something called, instead of a tax deduction, they have a better benefit. So you actually get, it's a tax credit. So you actually reduce the tax you pay rather than reduce the income. But they have a very weird situation, so that when the Canadian charity gives internationally, unlike just the US or the UK or Europe or even Hong Kong, instead of just giving the money to the foreign charity, the Canadian charity has to partner with the foreign organization. And so we have to enter into a more, it's the whole feeling is different. You know, we've really got to say that you as the foreign organization are undertaking what the Canadian organization would like to do. So it's almost like hiring you to do this particular job. It's not our job, obviously, it's yours, it's the program you want to do, but we have to, it's framed as if you're actually doing the work on behalf of the Canadian organization. So that makes Canada a little bit trickier, and they're trying very hard to do it. Also, I might say that it used to be, and it still may be possible, but it's a real nuisance. Revenue Canada decided that they wanted to be the most annoying revenue department in the world, and I think they've actually succeeded, and the Canadians would agree with me on that, so I'm not saying anything out of school. But it used to be possible if you were a university or and it had to be a university, not a college and not an arts organization, but you could register directly with Revenue Canada to receive tax benefits. They've made it so incredibly difficult that they've decided that that most universities are looking for other solutions. And so now that our Canadian Foundation has just got its Canadian registration, it should be able to solve that problem. So great, in Canada, great benefit to the donor, nuisance for everybody else, but we're trying to make that a little bit less. So if anybody has any specific questions about any particular countries, I'm happy to answer them. India comes up a bit. John Godfrey, who's on our thing, is the Indian expert. But it is possible to fundraise from India. It is possible to get money into India. I think the question there is whether, but it's got to be for, I think, very much important donations because of the difficulties of getting money in and out of India. So I think the point I would like to make about tax and legal is it is important. Most countries do not give tax benefits for gifts of property, but some do. So for example, I mean, over the years, we've been given for various charities, railway engine in the States. We had an airplane one year. Lots of art has gone to New Zealand. Lots of various things have gone around the world, particularly from America. America doesn't care what you give, as long as you follow the rules. There's no gift aid, for example, on gifts of property in the UK. So again, it's that's kind of an item by item. There's, for example, another example, gifts of shares, no problem in America. You get a tax deduction for the value of the shares. In Hong Kong, it's best to sell shares before and give proceeds rather than give shares. So everything's slightly different, of course, but there are benefits, and it's worth having a look at and knowing the rules when you're negotiating the gift. Although the tax and legal part of things is obviously much less important than it is the actual solicitation of the gift. So that's kind of the, that's kind of the quick version of flying around the world on tax and legal. So again, best benefits, I think, one of the very best benefits is the UK because of gift aid, because it goes to the charity, not to the donor. Canada, very good tax credit, but obviously, and Europe, the issue is, of course, is what country you're in. France is incredibly complicated in terms of its tax deductions for donations and things. Other countries are a little bit more generous, and etc. But I won't go through all of the European countries. There is money in Africa, and again, those can be very tricky, and probably less, very much less in terms of any tax issues to worry about there, and just get the money basically. So that's my whistle-stop tour of the tax benefits around the world. Do put in the chat if you have any specific questions about any of any particular country. What I wanted to do next is, Anna mentioned this whole question of using our foundation or a foundation to collect donations rather than setting something up in a particular country. And because Chapel in York does both, we set things up and we have foundations. It means that we can be we can actually do what's best for the client, because, well, we would do that anyway, hopefully. But it means that for our standpoint, we can be very good in terms of giving you what you actually need. Over the years, we started out by setting up charities, mostly American Friends organizations. But as the world has changed and we've looked at them, my feeling has become that you almost have to have a really, really good reason to want to set something up in a particular country as a standalone dedicated entity. The reason why is because increasingly countries have real problems about, the regulatory regimes have got bigger, more intrusive, and there's a new four-letter word that's arisen, and that's a bank. Banking is becoming such a nuisance, particularly when things are going internationally, that that almost in and of itself makes me just quake at the thought of setting up an entity and having to try to get a bank account. I will give Canada this: setting up a bank account in Canada is actually very easy. So I feel like I've been a bit unpleasant about them, but Canada's banking system is really, really good. So about 5 years ago, we embarked on setting up a series of foundations around the world to try to make it easier for organizations to fundraise internationally. And we now have 7. They are in the UK, the US, Hong Kong, Singapore, the Netherlands, which is an entree point to Europe, Switzerland, and now Canada. The whole point is that it means that people can fundraise in the country without having to do anything other than spending their time on doing the fundraising, because it's hard enough, as we all know, fundraising in other countries. And COVID has made it, well, that's the interesting question, actually, whether COVID's made it easier or harder. I mean, it certainly has meant that you don't have to get on an airplane. And those of us who traveled all the time are worrying about our gold status. But it also means that we've been able to engage with people through Zoom and other ways that hadn't maybe seemed like the best starting point. So we've been on amazing Zoom calls with people who have used it to go backstage of things when you wouldn't be able to do that if you were seeing your donors in their own country. So there's as always, there's winners and losers. And in fact, we're going to be talking about this at IFAB, which is our big conference in November. And we'll make sure you get information about it. It's only going to be about international major gift fundraising. It's because it's such an important topic and how we really do it post-COVID. I think we're talking about whether Zoom is the new airplane without the gold cards. Anyway, we embarked on this. We've now got 7, and we think that there in the major markets I've talked about, it's meant that we can do some other interesting things. So, for example, our US and UK entities are linked, so that if you've got an American donor who's sitting in the UK, that American donor gets both a US tax deduction for making a donation to the Chaplain York UK Foundation, but it also gets gift aid in the UK. So you get a bit of a double hit for making one donation. It means also that they've got it helps them with their legal things. The Netherlands Foundation I mentioned is an entree to Europe, because Europe has got something called Transnational Giving Europe, which means that there's a whole range of just European organizations that move money around Europe. It also means that our Dutch Foundation can help access some European grants programs, for example, that the EU offers. So that's a very interesting one. The Swiss Foundation, we all know that there's a lot of money in Switzerland, and so that's been a really interesting way to start being able to liberate. As a matter of fact, we started this whole thing with Switzerland because a university in Australia was looking for a very large donation from Switzerland, about 40 million, and the transnational giving would only give throughout Europe, so it wasn't of any use getting money out of it. So it really spurred us on to do that. So that's what the way we look at it. We make certain that we're giving you the donors, that we give both the donors and the members. We're trying to make certain that we are giving you what you need to have access to those countries, access to tax effective giving in those countries in as focused a way as possible, to make sure that the members, the people who have funds with us, are actually getting there. So what I wanted to do, and I see that there's a question about Singapore, but we'll come back to that if you don't mind. Let me just do this so that I feel that I've done what I need to do to make it work. I'm going to share my screen, hopefully, with you, and this is available if you want it. But this is our this is looking at the differences between setting up your own charity and using having a chaplain or others. I mean, I need to say that as much as we think we offer a very, very good option, there are other options, particularly in America. King Baldwin Foundation has got something, and CAF America has got something, but we think we aim to be obviously the best. But this is sort of looking at the fact of, and as I say, I'm happy to send this to anybody, and it sort of really works around the world in terms of whether you are wanting to set something up. It just means that you don't, basically, with talking about the entity requirements, you don't have to do any of the legal stuff. The biggest, hands down, I would say, is the board. Boards are an amazing thing. They are both an opportunity and a way to go straight to the mental institution. Because if you get people to be on a board, and they often really want to help you, and that's why they will say, we're on the board. They'll be on your board. But then after they've said they really want to help you, your question becomes, what do you do with them? Because they're not actually trained fundraisers. And so often they are seen as, the fundraisers in that particular country. But like all volunteers, they need a lot of volunteer management. And the issue becomes, are you spending your time managing them when actually they're not going to be your best, ambassadors because they're not trained fundraisers? rather than doing what you really need to do in the board in that country. And I know for those of you who do already have entities, I mean, it is a question. We deal with it all the time because you get board members who are irritated when you don't give them something to do. And yet they can take so much more time to manage them if you do give them something to do. So to me, that in itself, you know, if you've got people who you want to be ambassadors in a country, don't give them a legal thing to do. Give them something specific to do, like to, you know, have a coffee morning or something, rather than making them, putting them on a board. In sometimes they are wonderful. Sometimes they absolutely are brilliant. But out of the 125 organizations that we manage, I would say there's probably 3 that do it really, really well. And that's more the luck of who you've got on the board than how things work. You know, in some countries, for those of you who don't have countries where anybody ever writes checks anymore, there are still checks. Checks are the bane of America and Canada, because you have to have a bank, you have to have a place to receive them and to actually handle them. And in America at the moment, about 1 in 5 seems to get lost when the postman doesn't like you. So that's the sort of regulatory thing. As I say, I'm happy to share this with anybody. Then there's costs. Costs can, you know, there are issues. Obviously, if you have your own, the cost is to run that organization, but there is probably not a retention cost, which we and some of the other organizations charge a very small amount, or some not so small amounts. And then I think the real question is the intangible one. Sometimes you do get a donor who says, what's this Chaplain York Foundation, or what's this King Baudouin Foundation? I don't know them, I don't like them, you know, why don't you have your own? And sometimes, depending on the size of the donation, that is incredibly difficult to resist. But most of them, if you explain to them that, you know, what the organization that you're using does, why they do it, etc., and the advantages and often the cost advantages of doing it, it's really worth, you know. But every now and then you get somebody that's a nuisance. But of course, we all know that, you know, when you're fundraising anyway, there's often donors who are incredibly big nuisances anyway. The 1 to 10,000 range rather than the very big ones anyway. Other things, you know, sometimes they will, you know, you're asking them to give to something that says, this is our fund with the Chaplain York Foundation, rather than giving to something which says Friends of You, that sort of thing. So there are, you know, that's often a very minuscule problem, because you've spent all your time cultivating and stewarding your donor anyway. So that's part of the cultivation stewardness, which is, you know, stewardship, which is to explain why you are doing this, etc. And the final intangible is that in some jurisdictions, it really is useful to have something like Chaplain York, because we have a whole better infrastructure that you know, that provides confidence in that jurisdiction, whereas your own organization may not, because it's not really doing anything there, whereas where we exist in a whole lot of places. So I said I would talk for about a half an hour. We're about there. I hope I've sort of covered some of the things that you're interested in. Again, if you would like this particular thing, I'm happy to send it. We are, if you know, we're very interested in, you know, in what we're doing on this, because that's all we do, as Anna says, is international. So we do know a lot about all those particular things. Okay, Anna, I will shut up.
Can I just, before we turn away from the specific topic on what is best, set up your own legal entity or work via an intermediate entity, yeah. Is there a general advice that you can give from which point in time or when it would be definitely better for an organization to set up their own entity? Because if I see this, there are a lot of challenges, but then there are still organizations who do so and to prefer to do so. So what would you advise?
I mean, I think it's a very good question, because there is a lot of feeling that, oh, if we get big enough, or if we're getting enough money in, then we'll set up our own, that is the gold standard. And I don't believe it. Maybe 10 years ago, I might have said, oh yeah, you need to do something. But I don't believe there is an amount that is, that's important enough to suddenly say we need to set up an entity. Because, again, first of all, you have to maintain that. Now, every now and then, there is an organization for whom it's the right thing. So if you are, obviously, if you're doing something in that particular country rather than fundraising for you outside the country, that's a different thing, because then you're starting to do more operationally. If you are environmental and you really want to establish yourself as an organization in a particular country, so that you're really starting, you're thinking you're going to hire staff, not just one fundraiser, by the way, because we have, again, incredible problems with the sort of one fundraiser operation, because most often that fundraiser is not used to working on their own. They're used to working in a bigger shop. They are not often used to doing things for international organizations. So, but if you're trying to really establish yourself, if you're that kind of an organization, but almost any organization that is fundraising on behalf of something foreign. So for example, if you're fundraising on behalf of Canterbury Cathedral is never going to be in Canada. So I would, even if they're expecting $100 million gift, I would say you still don't need to, you're still not going to want to set up an entity, because the next year you may have something very, very small. So, it also, we find that fundraising internationally is often very cyclical. It may be because you've got a big anniversary. It may be because somebody's got a VC or a principal who's absolutely thrilled with loves Canada and wants to rush off to Canada. And when they're gone, then the whole thing sort of kind of rushes, slows down again. And then you're stuck with this Canadian organization or this Dutch organization or the whatever. So I think that we do get lots of people. I had somebody who came in and said, we want to, it wasn't Canterbury Cathedral. We had somebody who come in and said, we want our own entity for our cathedral. Why? Because everybody else has one. And we just said, that's the wrong answer. That's because they've had them for 40 years. And if they came in now, I wouldn't be doing it. I mean, if you're obviously a princess and you're going to have your own, but that's a different situation as well. We just took a $14 million donation to a university through our US Foundation. Nobody's going to, that's a reasonably large donation, but I wouldn't suddenly say, right, they need to set up something.
Thank you. Before I move to the question which we have in the chat on the Singapore Foundation, could you just give us a short, maybe background, how you chose the countries where Chapel and York set up their organization, their foundations? What was it?
Yeah.
Which reason?
So we tried to look for the major markets that clients were interested in. And because we can't have something everywhere. So we couldn't have one in 26 European countries. So we obviously knew everybody's interested in, well, we actually started with Hong Kong, and John Godfrey was our first director and Ralph Leonard was our second director. So we have all of Hong Kong's staffing here. Hong Kong was an obvious one because we knew how difficult it was to set up and run a Section 88 charity. And and also how long it took to get one going. So that was, and we knew that there was a lot of interest in Hong Kong. Singapore is still sort of, we're still working towards charitable status there, but we've also identified that there's other things that can happen in Singapore. For example, getting money for research and development is another thing that Singapore has a fantastic benefit for. So we knew that was interesting. We knew that the UK was of a lot of interest. We chose the Netherlands because they say it's a foothold into the EU. We chose Switzerland because there's obviously lots and lots of money and lots of wealth advisors there, and lots of people that have come from other countries to go to Switzerland, so that there was an international interest. We also felt that the Netherlands was an incredibly internationally looking country. So there is a lot of interest from the Netherlands in a lot of other countries. We did, as I say, the States, because everybody is, lots of people are interested in America. And we did Canada because Canada is also an incredibly international country. I think the second largest Chinese population, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, is in Toronto, or at least it's a huge population in Toronto. It's a very, very large Chinese population there. So there's a lot of, and Vancouver obviously looks to Asia Pacific rather than to Europe most of the time. So that's why we chose those countries. And we were just, there was a lot of begging going on with Canada, and with people who wanted to fundraise because they had things there. So that's why we chose those countries. At the moment, we have no plans to expand the 7 that we've got, but we are offering additional services through that, and generally, such as our international fundraising. And the other thing that we've seen is really important is being able to offer on the ground services in terms of running events and helping with stewardship and cultivation, because through COVID, we've been asked more and more, what can you do for us? We can't get there, but we want to do something with our people. So that's our foundation situation at the moment.
And is that the reason also why you chose Singapore as a country? If I take up this question now, who asks about the perceived and real benefits of having a fund set up with the Singapore Foundation, and if we see any changes with regard to local tax deductibility.
So I guess I'll turn over to Ralph to talk about whether there's going to be any changes. But basically, the benefit for Singapore, and one of the reasons for Singapore anyway, is because we know that lots of Australian, particularly universities, have deep Singaporean roots. There's a lot of connection between the two, and it is possible even now with a Singaporean charity to get tax deductible money, for example, that's used for scholarships. So that benefits the Singaporean community. And there's also some charities, depending on their work, where there's a benefit to Singapore, even though the actual work may be done somewhere else. So there are benefits. But Ralph, you could say whether you think that that there's going to be any changes. It's been that way for a very long time. So do you see any changes, Ralph? You're on mute.
Hold on. Okay, I don't see them changing this specific law because the ruling party has not done well in elections for the past 10 years, so they have to serve the citizens as much as possible. And that's an attitude that's generally within the Singapore population. But the reason why we set up in Singapore first, even though we don't have full tax deductible status, is the Singapore Charity Commission is extremely strict in terms of fundraising. So there's the example of a woman who was trying to raise money for construction workers in Singapore, who are almost like 99% of them come from South Asia. They're kept in dormitories, and they basically don't mix with the Singapore population, and they're not treated very well in terms of healthcare. So she set up a charity to help literally save workers' lives. The problem was she wanted to get the money to the workers as fast as possible, and the bank account wasn't open yet for the foundation that she set up. So she used her personal bank account. Sadly, the Charity Commission found this out, and within a year, she was bumped out from being the founding chair of that charity. It's still running today and serving the worker community in Singapore, but the Charity Commission takes a very, very dim view on people using their personal bank accounts for fundraising activities, even if it was helping people in Singapore. So we set up first in Singapore so that if a university and their alum in Singapore are going to hold a dinner or a golf outing or whatever it is to raise money for the university, we are that independent third party based within Singapore who is auditable, who is trackable, and will then be the third party to receive the funds on behalf of the alumni group. And we have transmitted funds to our members overseas. At the moment, we are also applying for what's called Institute of Public Character status, which means we would then have full charity status. Things have slowed down greatly because Singapore literally this week has reporting about 3,000 cases of COVID a week when they thought they had it nailed down a couple months ago. So everything's back to lockdown, work from home. Post now takes up to a week to go across a tiny little country. So yes, we are in the process of applying for the proper charity status. It'll take probably 6 to 9 months once all the paperwork is arranged. And we have started putting feelers out to our contacts within government, because at one time I was a member of the Singapore government about 10 years ago. And several of our board members in Singapore have very good connections with the ruling party. So stay tuned. We can receive donations now to help basically bank and audit and track all of that. But stay tuned, because we should be able to issue donation receipts in the future. The one thing that opened the door to Singapore in the very first place was something that Nancy mentioned to me several years ago. Revenue Canada requires essentially a contract between Chapel in York Canada and the member overseas. It's because the member basically becomes the project executive for Chapel in York Canada. And taking that draft contract, I then went and had several meetings with several ministries in Singapore, because there are literally 6 ministries overlooking the charity community within Singapore. And we did our shopping of the draft contract to the various ministries unofficially, and all of them said, interesting project, interesting idea, keep us informed. So with that kind of nod, or unofficial nod, that's how we started moving forward in Singapore.
Thank you, Ralph. Anna.
Yes, just because you mentioned bank accounts and the whole difficulties to open up bank accounts in various jurisdictions, or just the time it also takes, it came to my mind the question I had since a long time about multiple currencies, fundraising in multiple currencies. Because if we are in the international fundraising world, we obviously have our organization in one country, let's say Australia, and then we fundraise in Singaporean dollars and in Hong Kong dollars and in US dollars and in whatever other currency could be. There is a challenge in terms of the funding that you get in a certain currency, and then the funding you receive in your actual bank account in your own currency. How do you have any advice how to manage this the most beneficial way for the organization who's doing the fundraising?
Well, there's different things. A lot of particularly universities will have accounts in other currencies, particularly dollars, depends what they're doing. But Chapel in York's going through a work with FX companies to ensure that when we are making grants to organizations from our foundations, they're getting the best exchange rate. Our Hong Kong Foundation, as you know, it has got a multi-currency account, so that that donors can give in multiple currencies, which then can be directly sent to the member charity, which scared us to death when suddenly I think John, you were there, when somebody gave us $2 million US into our Hong Kong account, and we didn't know we had a multi-currency account, and suddenly this money arrived, and we also didn't know who it was for. And whilst we were thinking maybe a holiday would be nice, we actually went around and found out who it was for. But in most of the other countries, the donors, I mean, in the States, donors are going to give to you in dollars. Let's face it, there's just no other thing. In Canada, they're going to give to you in Canadian dollars. In the UK, they're basically going to give to you. So it's really Asia that's very interesting about that. And very much more advanced. So again, it's our job to try to make certain, and we are going through that we are, when we make a grant, we get the best exchange rate possible. But that's about, or if the member charity has got a currency account in another currency, that they let us know, so that we can keep the money in currency, and then they can deal with the changing currency when necessary. But outside of Asia, Pacific, everybody else is way behind you all in that particular thing.
That's actually flattering to hear, I find. Are there any other questions from the audience?
So Chris, the US and what are currently to be aware of. Oh, okay. Well, there's some special. So I was saying that there is some special rules that are in place in the States right now. 2020. I don't know whether they're going to be extended or not. And that is that. First of all, there's the bottom limit. There's some, in America, if you give under a certain amount, it's actually subsumed in the way they calculate their taxes there. But at the moment, anything you give is, so whether it's major gifts or smaller gifts are going to be are tax deductible separately. And there is no upper limit because usually there is, when you give to a public charity like ours or anybody else's, there are, there's a limit of 50% of your adjusted gross income. That's ditched for this year. So if somebody's going to give a really huge gift, they would be able to deduct all of it this year rather than having to do carry forwards and carry backs and other kinds of really complicated stuff. So it's just worth, if you are looking at any major gifts or any kinds of gifts, just make sure you get them in this year until they sort out what they're doing for next year. So that was, that's the comment about that. And do feel free, anybody, if you want to come to me directly. Anna's going to put my email address on there, so I would be very happy to talk to anybody that wants to talk to me.
Yes.
So
I think we missed the question actually, Nancy, because it was directed to you and not.
Oh, sorry. The question was, what do we be aware of in the U.S.
Okay.
With major donors? So the point is, there's extra benefits this year. We don't know whether they're going to keep going or not. But so the top limits are gone and the bottom limits are gone. So it's just worth ensuring you get things anyway. And of course, 33 1/3% of all donations in America happen in the last 3 months of the year, which is to the end of December. And 17% are in the last 3 days. And they're accused of people trying to get their envelopes in letter boxes by midnight on the 31st, because for some reason they hold on to their money until the very, very, very last second, and then it goes in the thing, and they get their tax deduction as long as it's posted by by midnight of the 31st. So you all, this is your last push in the States. Then establishing a foundation board overseas versus creating informal structures or mobilizing volunteers, looking at these options. Benefit to creating an alumni chapter versus some other hybrid or informal structure. So that's a really interesting question, Daniel, because that's not looking at the tax at all. That's looking at whether whether you're wanting to have fundraising and alumni chapters in the same sort of entity. I think that so with the ones that we've run and that we've been watching, in terms of a legal entity, this is the one thing I would sort of run a mile from, unless you have a really, really, really good reason for wanting to do it. But in any informal structures really don't make a difference. So I would suggest that whether you have alumni chapters and fundraising chapters, etc., then you can you can work and deal with them as you wish. And if you've got established vehicles, then really the rest of it's just up to whatever works best for your organization. I don't know exactly where or whatever, but and somebody else might want to jump in on this. Please feel free to. You can use your.
I think Daniel, I'll just, having worked in universities before, and some of the places where the alumni set up their own organization before the university did, I would say if you can get there first, so you plant your flag, then you can control it. Because if there's already an alumni group in a city or country or wherever it is, that's there first, it gets to be a bit messy and sticky if you then try to do something with them or try to then tell them what to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, so yeah, just looking at your question again, I think your point of saying creating informal structures and mobilizing volunteers. Yeah, I think, and if you've already got the legal structure, then you really need people for the role that they're going to play, or at least, or maybe I'm misunderstanding. So feel free to.
Yeah, I think Daniel, if you wish, you can
you're on the right track, Nancy.
I mean, to me, I was talking earlier about boards being the board of a legal structure, but that doesn't mean that they have to also run your alumni organizations over there or whatever. It really depends who you've got. As I say, so we're actually the administrators. We do everything for one of the a university, for example, in America, and as a matter of fact, I'm the administrator because I wanted to be really involved so I could be able to talk effectively about how these things work. And they are absolutely in a position where they've got a really engaged board. The development office is not enthusiastic to let them do anything because it's a nuisance in a time, which is a shame. They do have alumni chapters around the country, which don't have anything to do really with the legal entity, and those operate rather better because the alumni person back at the university is rather enthusiastic about rushing around doing things with the alumni chapters. So there they've got that whole, different things. And then when they want to do a particular event, for example, they bring us in to actually run the event because then they don't have to ask their alumni people to sit on the front door and take tickets and all that sort of stuff, either the university people or they don't want to ask their alumni chapters to do that kind of thing, or to actually even sort out the event in case they, it's not what they want. So that's a whole hybrid thing, I think, of doing various different people doing different things to achieve what they're trying to do in terms of both engagement and fundraising.
We have talked a lot about boards now, and I think one of the more general advice would maybe be that if somebody wants to set up their own foundation and or their own entity, I would definitely look for at least one board member who has fundraising experience and understanding about the complexities, both in national and international fundraising, right? And understanding about the necessities you need to steward your donors, to accompany them through their overall donation journey. From my point of view, I think this would be the most general advice I could give if somebody wants to set up their own foundation and their own board.
Yeah, it's just so sometimes so difficult because your alumni, for example, you may not have anybody fundraising that's in your own alumni group. And so then that's where the problem is, because what you're saying is so correct. In an ordinary world, you'd look for somebody who's got accounting, somebody who's got fundraising, somebody who's got this thing. But when you're doing it in another country, amongst the people who are involved in your university or charity, then you've got a much smaller pool of people we can do, and we have done, for example, training of alumni or training of the board to explain all that to them. But then again, do you want to let them be your fundraisers? Because you've got to manage that relationship, and and sometimes training boards even creates a worse situation, because then they're saying, okay, we're ready, we've done the training, let us go. And then managing them as volunteers to go is really the sort of, that's the really cutting edge. And I have to say, in 25 years, we've never completely cracked it, because there isn't a perfect answer to that. And it's one of the reasons I really do try to keep people from setting up entities for that very reason. Anyway, yeah.
Thank you. We only have a few minutes left, so unless there are any other questions or somebody would like to contribute something?
Just from my standpoint, may I just say thank you to everybody who's here. I know you'll want to do that as well, but also to thank Ralph and Anna for the very good jobs that they're doing with stewarding our foundations in Asia Pacific and for hosting today.
Thank you. That's very nice.
Thank you.
And thank you for those of you who've come on behalf of Chaplain York.
Yes, that's what I was just about to do. So I propose that we close this roundtable. We will send around the document that Nancy showed over her screen share. And you will also receive every now and then some information when we have new roundtables or new events upcoming, so that you can stay on the loop. Sign up if you're interested. The next one is a very important one. It's the International Fundraising Across Borders Conference, which Nancy mentioned before, which will take place in the second week of November, the 11th of November for the Asia Pacific region, on a major gift fundraising. So I really would like to encourage you to have a look and see if this is interesting for you. And other than that, I just wish you a very good day, and thank you very much for participating.